The siege of Kepler Station, the neutron cannons carved through the darkness of space like scalpels through flesh, and Commander Zara Voss knew her station was dying. Kepler Station, once a beacon of interstellar cooperation where 12 species traded and mingled in harmony, now shuddered under the relentless assault of the Vorthak Empire. Through the transparent aluminum viewports of the command center, she watched another section of the outer ring dissolve into superheated plasma and scattered debris. The Vorthak didn't believe in warnings or negotiations. They believed in consumption. Their massive dreadnoughts, each one a kilometer of black metal and malevolent purpose, hung in the void like predatory insects. Their hulls were studded with weapon ports that never stopped firing, never stopped killing. The station's shields, already strained beyond their design limits, flickered like a dying candle in a hurricane. Zara's forearms moved across the holographic command interface with desperate efficiency. Her species, the Altarians, had evolved on a low-gravity world where multitasking meant survival. Now, even with 4 hands working simultaneously, she couldn't keep pace with the cascade of system failures. The main reactor was operating at 30% capacity. Life support had failed in 7 sectors. The weapons grid was more gap than grid. Around her, the command center was chaos given form. Officers from half a dozen species worked frantically at their stations. A Zalathi engineer, his crystalline form pulsing with stress patterns, tried to reroute power from non-essential systems that no longer existed. A pair of Mokari twins, their telepathic link allowing them perfect coordination, managed what remained of the station's defensive batteries. Everyone moved with the particular urgency of beings who understood they were living their final hours. The refugee ships had been arriving for weeks before the Vorthak fleet appeared. Small vessels, cargo haulers, private yachts, anything with a hyperdrive had fled toward Kepler Station, carrying terrified families and whispered stories of worlds consumed. The Krillians had been among the last to arrive, their sleek silver vessels barely outrunning the advancing fleet. Their leader, an elderly female named Scythe, whose bioluminescent skin had dulled to nearly gray with age and fear, had warned them personally. "They don't conquer," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper in the council chamber. "They harvest. Every resource, every technology, every thinking being becomes raw material for their expansion. We watched them process our colony on Theta Ridge. The screams lasted for days before the processors finally silenced them. The Council had sent distress calls to every major power in the sector. The Galactic Trade Federation had expressed deep concern and promised to discuss the matter at their next quarterly meeting. The hegemony of aligned worlds had sent thoughts and prayers. The Celestial Republic had actually dispatched a fleet, but it was still 3 weeks away. 3 weeks might as well have been 3 centuries. Another explosion rocked the station. This one was closer, close enough that Zara felt the vibration through the deck plating. The lights flickered and stayed off for 3 heartbeats before the emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in a sickly red glow. She checked the tactical display and felt her primary heart skip a beat. The Vorthak had breached the outer hull in Sector 12. Their warrior drones would be pouring in now, 6-legged nightmares of chitin and blade, designed to process organic material with maximum efficiency. "Commander," the Mokari twins spoke in perfect unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. "The remaining civilian ships are requesting permission to attempt an evacuation run." Zara looked at the tactical display. The Vorthak dreadnoughts had positioned themselves in a perfect sphere around the station. Any ship trying to run would be vaporized in seconds. But what else could she tell the 30,000 souls still trapped on the station? Wait here to be processed into nutrient paste? "Tell them to prepare for departure," she said, her voice steady despite the despair eating at her from within. "We'll use what's left of our weapons to try to punch a hole in their formation." It was a lie, and everyone in the command center knew it. But it was a lie that might give people a few more moments of hope before the end. Sometimes that was all a commander could offer. The main view screen suddenly filled with the hulking silhouette of the Vorthak flagship, a monstrosity called the Consumption that was nearly 3 kilometers long. Its main weapon, a graviton beam that could crush a moon into a marble, was charging. The distinctive whine of gravitons being compressed filled the command center, even through the vacuum of space and multiple hull layers. Physics shouldn't have allowed that sound to travel, but Vorthak technology had a disturbing tendency to ignore physics when convenient. This was it then, the final moment. Zara straightened her uniform and prepared to face death with dignity. Around her, her crew did the same. The Zalathi engineer's crystalline form shifted to the deep blue of acceptance. The Makari twins held hands, their telepathic link ensuring neither would die alone. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The graviton beam fired, and then the universe exploded, but not in the way anyone expected. The explosion came from above, from the cosmic north where no ships had been detected. A series of objects moving at velocities that should have torn them apart screamed through the void. They were small, no larger than shuttlecraft, but they burned like miniature stars as they descended. Their heat signatures were off the charts, their approach vectors insane, their deceleration curves impossible. One of them, trailing fire and fury, slammed into the Vorthak flagship's upper hull with the force of a tactical nuke. It punched through the armor like it was tissue paper, disappeared into the ship's interior, and emerged from the bottom hull in a shower of vented atmosphere and Vorthak blood. The graviton beam, only partially charged, discharged wildly into space, missing Kepler station by mere kilometers. More of these impossible objects followed, each one finding a Vorthak ship with unerring accuracy. They didn't destroy the dreadnoughts, they wounded them, crippled them, left them spinning and venting precious atmosphere into the uncaring void. It was precise, calculated, almost surgical in its brutality. The emergency communication channel, the one reserved for first contact situations, crackled to life. The voice that came through spoke an accented but clear galactic standard, the trade language that most species learned. But there was something about it, something in the consonants and the rhythm, that suggested a throat designed for entirely different sounds. Kepler Station, this is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force, 3rd Reconnaissance Division. We are boots on deck. I repeat, we are boots on deck. Recommend you button up and watch the show. The cavalry's here, but we're the opening act. Zara stared at the communication panel. Terrans, humans, the mythical Deathworlders from a planet so hostile that its own moon caused planetary floods, where the gravity could crush most species' bones, where the radiation levels would cook a Zalathi in minutes. They were real and they were here. This is Commander Voss, she managed to reply, her voice cracking slightly. Your assistance is appreciated, but our intelligence shows only 7 entry pods. The Vorthak have over 40 capital ships. The laugh that came through the comm was dark and entirely too pleased with itself. Commander, with respect, you're thinking like someone who fights fair. We're humans. We don't do fair. We do effective. My team will be at your auxiliary airlock in 5 minutes. Have someone meet us who won't shoot on sight. We're not pretty after a combat drop, and I'd hate for there to be a friendly fire incident. The channel closed, leaving the command center in stunned silence. On the tactical display, the 7 pods had landed on or near 7 different Vorthak ships. What could 7 soldiers, even human soldiers, do against the crews of dreadnoughts? 5 minutes later, Zara had her answer when she met them at the airlock. The 4 humans who entered looked like they had been forged rather than born. They were compact, dense with muscle, and moved with an economy of motion that suggested every calorie of energy was precious. Their armor was scarred and blackened from their violent entry. The leader, presumably Chen, removed his helmet to reveal a face that belonged on a predator. His eyes scanned the corridor with mechanical precision, cataloging exits, potential cover, and threat vectors. But it was what they carried that made Zara's blood run cold. Not plasma rifles or neutron cannons or any of the sophisticated energy weapons that civilized species used. They carried chemical projectile weapons, brutal things that killed with kinetic energy and hydrostatic shock. They had blades, actual blades, strapped to their armor. One of them, a woman with burn scars covering half her face, was casually juggling 3 spheres that Zara recognized with horror as fusion grenades. Commander Voss, Chen said, offering what might have been intended as a reassuring smile, but looked more like a threat display. We need information. Not about their ships or weapons, we've already figured those out. We need to know about their biology. How fast do they move? What's their visual range? Do they have any particular fears or phobias? What frequency do they communicate on? What? You want to know if they're afraid of something? Chen's smile widened and Zara realized that humans had far too many teeth for any reasonable species. Everything's afraid of something, Commander. We just need to figure out what and then make sure they experience it, repeatedly, until they decide that maybe this sector of space isn't worth the trouble. The hunt begins. The War Council that convened in Kepler Station's damaged but functional conference room was unlike any Zara had ever attended. The humans had spread equipment across the table that looked like it belonged in a museum, rather than a military briefing. Paper maps, actual paper made from processed plant matter covered with hand-drawn notations. Chen was explaining their plan while the other 3 humans prepared their equipment with methodical precision. The Vorthak made 3 critical errors, Chen said, pointing to a hand-drawn schematic of a dreadnought that was disturbingly accurate. First, they assume that bigger is better. Those dreadnoughts are magnificent for fleet actions and orbital bombardments, but they're also slow, predictable, and have a turning radius measured in kilometers. Second, they're hive-minded, at least partially, cut the right connection, and entire sections of their fleet go dark for precious seconds. And third, they've never fought humans. The Krillian elder, Sith, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with skepticism, spoke up. You speak of errors, but they have destroyed entire civilizations. What makes your species so different? The scarred woman, introduced as Sergeant Sarah Demo Reeves, looked up from the chemical explosives she was mixing by hand. We're persistence predators, ma'am. Our ancestors used to hunt by following prey for days, weeks if necessary, until it collapsed from exhaustion. We're not the strongest or the fastest, but we don't stop. Ever. The Vorthak are used to enemies that fight them directly, that match strength with strength. We're going to introduce them to psychological warfare. Chen activated a holographic display showing the Vorthak fleet positions. Several of their ships were still venting atmosphere from the entry pod strikes. Phase 1 is already complete. We've introduced doubt. They don't know what hit them or how we appeared without being detected. Phase 2 begins now. Reeves, you're up. The demonstration that followed would haunt Zara's dreams for years to come. Reeves had somehow acquired samples of Vorthak pheromones during their violent entry. She had synthesized them, altered them, and created what she called a panic bomb. The chemistry was beyond any of the allied species' understanding, requiring intuitive leaps that no rational mind would make. Vorthak communicate through scent as much as sound, Reeves explained, holding up a small canister. This particular cocktail tells them that their queen is dead, their hive is burning, and their larvae are being consumed by parasites. It's basically every primal fear they have condensed into aerosol form. Within hours, the humans had infiltrated 3 Vorthak dreadnoughts, not through the airlocks or docking bays, but through waste disposal ports and maintenance crawlways that no sane species would even consider as entry points. They moved through the ship's ventilation systems, spaces so tight that even the compact humans had to dislocate joints to navigate them. They planted Reeves's panic bombs in strategic locations. The effect was immediate and devastating. The affected dreadnoughts erupted in chaos. Vorthak drones, driven mad by the conflicting pheromone signals, turned on each other. Command structures collapsed as officers retreated to protect non-existent larvae. One ship actually opened fire on another, convinced it was infected with some kind of biological weapon. But the humans weren't done. The third member of their team, Specialist David Park, was what they called a cyber warfare specialist. Zara had thought he meant he would attack their computer systems. The reality was far worse. Park had figured out that Vorthak technology was partially organic, using bio-neural circuits that were vulnerable to certain frequency combinations. He broadcasted what he called brown noise on their communication channels, a sound specifically calibrated to cause involuntary muscle spasms in Vorthak physiology. The fourth human, Corporal Elena Vasquez, was perhaps the most terrifying of all. She was their sniper, but not in any way Zara understood the term. She didn't shoot at enemies from a distance. She shot at specific components on their ships from inside Kepler Station, using a weapon that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. She targeted communication arrays, sensor nodes, and most disturbingly, viewing ports on the command decks. It's not about killing them, Vasquez explained as she lined up another impossible shot through 3 layers of station hull and across 12 kilometers of vacuum. It's about letting them know they're never safe. Every time they look out a window, they'll wonder if today's the day a hypervelocity round takes their head off. The Vorthak tried to respond, of course. They sent boarding parties to Kepler Station. The humans met them in the damaged sectors where artificial gravity had failed and the lights didn't work. The Vorthak drones, evolved for the rigid hierarchies and open battlefields of their homeworld, were unprepared for enemies that attacked from above, below, and sometimes from inside their own ranks. The humans used the zero gravity like they were born to it, bouncing off walls, spinning through the air, always attacking from unexpected angles. Chen led these defenses personally, and Zara watched one encounter through the security feeds. A squad of 12 Vorthak drones, each one a 2-meter-tall killing machine with 4 arms ending in bone blades, entered a darkened cargo bay. Chen was alone, armed with nothing but a steel rod and his armor. The fight lasted 43 seconds. The human moved like liquid, like gravity was a suggestion rather than a law. He shattered joints, severed nerve clusters, and left the entire squad disabled but alive, whimpering in their own panic pheromones. But perhaps the most effective tactic was the simplest. The humans talked. They broadcasted on open channels, discussing their plans in detail, describing the tortures they would inflict, the ways they would dismantle the Vorthak fleet piece by piece. They played music, strange rhythmic sounds from their homeworld that seemed designed to induce anxiety. They counted down to events that never came, keeping the entire Vorthak fleet on constant alert. Sleep deprivation, Chen explained when asked about it. Humans need less sleep than most species, and we can function without it for days if necessary. The Vorthak, with their hive mind structure, need synchronized rest periods. We're not letting them have it. By the 3rd day, the Vorthak fleet was in disarray. Ships were firing at shadows. Crews were refusing orders, and 3 dreadnoughts had actually retreated to the edge of the system. The humans had suffered no casualties, though Park had complained about a pulled muscle from crawling through a particularly tight maintenance shaft. The turning point came when the Vorthak consumption, their massive flagship, decided to end things decisively. It charged its main weapon, the graviton beam, to full power, preparing to simply destroy Kepler Station and everything around it. The energy readings were off the charts. Every species on the station knew that this time, there would be no last-second rescue. Chen smiled when he saw the readings. Finally, I was wondering when they'd get desperate enough to do something stupid. He turned to Reeves. Remember that thing we discussed? The thing I said we'd only do if we had no other choice? The thing you made me promise never to tell anyone about? That's the one. Do it. Reeves sighed and pulled out a small device that looked like nothing more than a remote control. She pressed a single button. The consumption exploded, not from the outside but from within. A series of small explosions, perfectly timed and placed, cascaded through its superstructure. The graviton beam, already at full charge, had nowhere to discharge except back into the ship's own systems. The dreadnought, 3 kilometers of advanced technology and military might, folded in on itself like a collapsing star. The gravitational forces it had been preparing to weaponize turned inward, crushing the ship into a ball of super-dense metal, no larger than a shuttle. The remaining Vorthak fleet went silent. For long minutes, no weapons fired, no ships moved. Then, as if controlled by a single mind, which they probably were, they turned and fled. Not an organized retreat, but a rout. A panic-driven flight from predators they couldn't understand and couldn't fight. The command center of Kepler Station erupted in celebration. Species that had never shown emotion in public wept openly. The Mokari twins sang a harmony of joy that resonated through the deck plating. Even the stoic Zalathi engineer's crystalline form blazed with brilliant gold light. But Zara noticed that the humans weren't celebrating. They were already packing their equipment, preparing to leave. She approached Chen, who was cleaning his weapons with the same mechanical precision he'd shown throughout the engagement. You're leaving? The threat isn't over. They could return. Chen looked up at her with those predator eyes, but for the first time she saw something else there. Exhaustion, perhaps, or sadness. They won't come back, Commander. Not here, not anywhere humans are known to be. We've entered their racial memory as something to avoid. That's what we do. We're not conquerors or empire builders. We're the galaxy's warning label. Danger, humans present. Find somewhere else to be. But you saved us all. You're heroes. We're soldiers, Commander. We did a job. In 6 hours, the Terran fleet will arrive. They'll help you rebuild, establish a permanent garrison, but my team and I will be gone by then. There's always another crisis, another desperate situation where conventional tactics have failed. He stood, shouldering his pack full of equipment that no civilized species would consider military hardware. You want some advice, Commander? When the diplomats and the peacemakers come, when they try to understand what happened here, tell them the truth. Tell them that humans came and the Vorthak ran. Let that story spread. The more species that know we're out here, the less often we'll have to prove it. The humans left as suddenly as they had arrived, their small stealth ship departing from a bay that sensors insisted was empty. Zara watched them go from the observation deck. These impossible beings from a world that shouldn't support life, who had turned the tide of an impossible battle with tricks and traps and an understanding of fear that no prey species should possess. 3 months later, when the rebuilt Kepler station was inaugurated as the first mixed-species military outpost, with permanent human presence, Zara was asked to give a speech. She stood before representatives of 40 different species and told them the truth. Just as Chen had suggested, "We thought all hope was lost," she said. Her forearms spread wide to encompass the gathered crowd.
Our weapons had failed, our defenses were shattered, and death was upon us.
And then the humans came, falling from the sky like ancient gods of war. They didn't bring bigger weapons or stronger shields. They brought something far more dangerous. They brought the will to win by any means necessary, the creativity to turn everything into a weapon, and the persistence to never ever stop. She paused, looking at the human delegation, a mix of soldiers and diplomats who looked uncomfortable with the attention. The galaxy calls them Deathworlders, and perhaps they are. But when death comes for you and yours, isn't it good to know that death has already picked a side, and it's ours? The applause was thunderous, but Zara noticed something that would stay with her forever. The human soldiers weren't smiling. They were scanning the crowd, checking exits, analyzing threats. Even here, even in safety, they were hunting, because that's what persistent predators do. They never really stop,